No.
Good evening and welcome to the October 27th, 2022 Curriculum and Pupil Services Committee meeting of the School District of Haverford Township. Let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now I will turn it over to Dr. Rushi for our first agenda item, which is the enrollment report. Great.
Thank you, Ms. Wiedemann. This is the time of the year where we will deliver the annual report on enrollment for the current school year. So David Parker from the Office of Pupil Services looks at all of our data, works with other colleagues across the district, and what's going to be reported tonight are referred to as the October 1st count. You have to identify one point in time where every district across the Commonwealth is going to report their data, because we all know that from day to day, those numbers can change. But this is the consistent number or consistent point in time when those data are reported. So he will be sharing with us this evening what the enrollments look like at each one of the buildings. It will also be broken down by grade level. He'll do a comparison to what was projected to be the enrollment for this year and what the actual enrollment for this year is. David's done a great job pulling all of that information together. I'll just remind our colleagues, David's not a demographer. So in terms of interpreting why numbers might be low in one place, higher in another, asking him about real estate in the community, he's not the person to ask, but he does interact with the demographer who initially did the study. That gentleman from Montgomery and Associates, they've been very generous with their time in speaking with David when he does have some questions, and we may get to a point in time where we want to sort of update that information, but we can talk about that at a later time. David, I'm going to turn it over to you now. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Rushi, and members of the board. You flip the. Thank you. Can you hear me okay? All right. I was told recently in a meeting, court stenographer, I was out pacing, who was very confident she could transcribe it 220 words a minute. So if I start speaking too quickly, just flag me. I jumped ahead to the one slide already, I apologize. But going into our annual update, using the same format we have used in recent years, we start with the elementary level. And you see here on the first slide a comparison between the 5 elementaries, Chatham Park, Chestatwald, Coopertown, Linwood, and Manoa. Projected numbers with our actual numbers as of the official 10-1 enrollment snapshot. In general, across the 5 elementaries, we are at approximately 33% compared to the projected numbers across the 5 buildings. As a breakdown, we are, as you see, Chatham Park's at 608, actual compared to 654, 589, Chestatwald compared to a 684, et cetera. So Chatham Park is at 93% compared to the projection. Chestatwald at 86% compared to projection. Coopertown, 93, Linwood, 93%, and Manoa at 100%. So just on the first glimpse, on the first, at our elementary level, we typically or historically have seen the most fluctuations or the most variance, if you will. We continue to see some differences compared to our projections to where our actuals are, but we'll get into some of the hypotheses why that might be happening. As Dr. Rushi alluded to a moment ago, Mr. Montgomery and his associate, Mr. Lambert, from Montgomery Associates, have been in recent contact over the last 2 weeks as we've been refining our 10-1 projections and putting everything into these tables for you. Excuse me. this is probably a better slide to look at the elementary level. Again, on the left, using a similar format from prior school terms or school cycles. You see the projected numbers on the left, the actual numbers on the right. In this particular presentation, we elected to identify from a percentage or a ratio perspective the differences, and not necessarily last year, per my recollection, but perhaps in prior reporting cycles, we would identify a plus minus of maybe 5 or 10 students in reflection and looking at the numbers now 2 years in a row where the numbers were slightly different than the projections. There was a decision to look at ratios because from a perspective of true math, and with Dr. Nesbitt in the room and others, I just want to make sure that that's highlighted, that we're looking at percentage or ratio differences. So on the right-hand side where you see in this particular cycle, red numbers, Chatham Park I'll use as the example, kindergarten 81, that is a 10% or more difference than the 91 projected for the enrollment at Chatham Park. As you go across the table on the actual table across the grade levels or down the rows, I said that backwards. I think down the columns or across the rows, you can identify where we have some particular gaps that we're looking to or we're curious about investigating further with Mr. Montgomery and associates should the board decide that's prudent action. And this table also represents our entire enrollment, Haverford Online, as well as our traditional enrollment. And I'll break that down for you in a second with the next slide. Slide 3, we see here our total Haverford Online elementary enrollment at 6, and it's just subtracting off from a previous slide the total enrollment for the elementary for the traditional in-class or brick and mortar. For comparisons, our HOL or Haverford Online enrollment this time last year was a total of 93 students. At the elementary level, there were 32. So just using that one sliver or one thread of data, you can see clearly 6 students Haverford Online at the elementary level this year compared to 32 a year ago today. If I go back 2 years, understanding we were in the middle of a pandemic, we were at 576 elementary students in Haverford Online. So I didn't, in conversations internally with Mrs. Battistelli and Dr. Rushi et al., we didn't want to draw too many comparisons to the pandemic period, but I just wanted to give you an idea of where we are from an HOL perspective right now compared to where we were even 2 years ago. Another topic, and again, if I'm moving too quickly, please just flag me or yell Dave. From a historic perspective, in this presentation, we've highlighted the differences between our charter school enrollments and our in-house enrollments, or Haverford enrollments, again, combined HOL and or brick and mortar. And although we did see a spike during the pandemic period, as you can see in this simple table, the numbers are going back down to meet more of our traditional or historic averages. At this point in time, the only notation I would like to make for the board's benefit in the 22-23, as of this morning, we were made aware that we have a pending new high school enrollment where you see 6 that actually is most likely to be 7 a week from today. But other than that, that's a very accurate data. I feel like I'm going too quickly. Any questions so far? Okay. On this slide, again, following our historic patterns in terms of presentation styles, we're comparing the middle school, the projections, 22-23 with the actuals, and then from a year prior. This year, we're at 98% capacity compared to our projections. A year ago today, we're at just under 100%. So we're within the variance does tighten up, if you will, from a layperson's perspective. Once we get past the elementary level, that has, in my tenure at least, that has historically been consistent, not ever been a concern. When we get to a high school slide, you'll see the same pattern. I just want to make sure you're aware of that. The variance most of the variance we see and from a K-12 perspective in our district is at the elementary level, and most specifically at K and 1 historically. We also traditionally we report on transfers, new transfers in at our 6th grade level and 9th grade level. This slide is capturing the 6th grade transfers. We are always interested in where we're pulling students in from. If there are new students to our community compared to students who have historically that are established here, they live among, part of Haverford Township, but chose for one reason or another to do homeschooling or charter schools or parochial schooling. So this is just a quick breakdown of new enrollments for this year in the 6th grade, and you'll see a slide momentarily for the 9th grade representing the same type of information. Similar to the middle school slide a moment ago, comparisons 22-23 to 21-22, actual and projected, grade by grade. In the current year, we're at 97% compared to the projections, 97% capacity compared to projections. I want to underscore, when I use that number, it's not 97% of capacity for the facilities, purely based on projections. My comments are only based on projections and the enrollment work done in the spring of 2021. It has nothing to do with facilities. I just want to be clear about that. But again, similar to the middle school, Haverford High School currently is at 97% capacity compared to projections. A year ago, it was just under 100% as well, 99.7. And again, compared to the 6th grade slide, we do look at as an entry point, students to come in at this level that have not been enrolled with us historically or previously, where are they coming from? And we're just taking a quick look. Parochial, which tends to be the majority of our new enrollments, new first-time enrollments for community members who have lived here previously. And this slide provides a much broader view, demographic view, obviously, of the district, and we're showing you a pattern or a trend, at least, over the last 3 consecutive school years. Notably, other than our overall enrollment increasing, we have low income slightly up, about 12% to the previous year. Our EL population is an area I'm particularly interested in, also is up compared to the previous year, about 30%, 33%. But in general, the numbers tend to reflect our overall consistent trends across the district in all buildings and all demographic subgroups. I don't know if there's specific or particular questions in this slide, but I just want to take an extra moment to pause in case for any board members there might be. Now I'll move on. And this is a new slide compared to previous presentations, at least that I've delivered. In this slide, I was attempting to capture, if you look at the top portion, top table, these are true numbers, our PIMS numbers, our 10-1 snapshot, air quotes, numbers, as we refer to locally or internally. And then you see there right before where it says district projected enrollment, the 22-23 true 10-1 or snapshot numbers. And then underneath what the projections are for Mr. Montgomery and Associates from the spring 21 work. As I pause slightly, so as you're perusing or reviewing the numbers, because there's a lot of data here, I wanted to share with Mr. Montgomery specifically, but also Mr. Lambert, as part of that collective effort. Mr. Montgomery's comment was he was curious why our numbers were a little bit off compared to where they thought they would be. In his experience in Delaware County, even when there's not as clean of a catchment area like we have, we're very fortunate, or one township or one municipality. So when they look at birth rates or they look at parcel data from real estate transactions, it's relatively easy from a demographer's point of view. Again, as Dr. Ritchie mentioned, I'm not a demographer, so I'm paraphrasing and relaying. But from that perspective, it's easier compared to other districts or LEAs to try and, or not try, but to create this type of report. That being said, the data itself for 2 consecutive years being off by 3% or 5% is something that needs to be looked at from Montgomery's perspective and Lambert's perspective. But we'll defer to the board and the board's discretion in terms of what actions need to come next. But as you look at the top, and from my perspective at least, when you look at the top table here and you look at the trends over the years of actual PIMS enrollment numbers, and then look at the projections, there is a discrepancy, and without getting into the weeds, if you will, with the statistical terminology or analysis, there's enough of a variance there, given the variables that are finite for us, that perhaps it warrants a deeper look going forward. Mr. Montgomery did add, anecdotally, he's in Georgia right now, working on a long-term project for the state of Georgia with his colleague, Mr. Lambert. But he did add, as an anecdote, he was in touch after or on behalf of the district, made a request for some follow-up information and provided some preliminary data, not the finite data or the final data you're looking at here tonight. Mr. Montgomery did add or volunteer. He's been in contact with realtors in our immediate area, specifically in Haverford Township, but also in Radnor Township, Lower Merion, et cetera. Sales have been down 26% from a year ago, June, July. Obviously, to those who may not be aware, interest rates have adjusted, which affects the mortgage rates. Other types of financial variables have influenced that. I won't get into particulars because it's really not outside my area of expertise. But he also referenced that historically, our attrition rate has been around 4%. Students that start with us at some point, but are not part of a final graduation cohort eventually down the line. So as an example, quickly, you start school with us as a 3rd grader today. You finish 3rd grade, you go on to 4th grade perhaps, but for whatever reason your family moves, you just don't finish with it. You graduate, from somewhere else. That would be, in a loose definition for this presentation, the purposes of this presentation, a student we would count towards attrition. So a student who started at some point but did not finish. In those examples, over roughly a 20-year period, we've been averaging around 4% a year. Again, rough ballpark numbers. But that percentage has increased, and we're curious about why. Is it because of, regardless, we're curious about why. So that's something that maybe we want to look into, but right here for the moment and what we look to provide to the board in October, the most important thing is our projected numbers are not statistically as aligned as we feel they should be going forward, and it's something we want to keep an eye on. And that's it for what I have this evening, at least in my prepared notes. Any questions from the board?
Just have a comment, because I think it's helpful in the HMS and HS slides to see both the actual and projected from 2021 too. And I'm trying to do the math, and like the very last one, the district actual enrollment of the elementary grades from 2021, 2022. But it would have been helpful to have that like in these elementary slides as well, have that 2021 comparison that you have in the.
I'm sorry, which slide, the HMS one?
No, it's in HMS and
Set up
HHS.
HMS. Set up HMS and set up the 5 elementaries the way HMS and
Right.
HHS are set
I would have
up.
liked to see
We
this
can do
exact
that.
same.
We can provide that if that's helpful.
Well, right, because just sticking with HMS, you can see that the projection was 1662, the total was 1627 for 2022. And that makes it seem like, if you're just looking at that enrollment went down in HMS, but it didn't, it went up. But our projections, and I think that's what you're saying in your presentation, the projection was just too far off.
The projection is higher than where we are. We can't confidently explain why.
Yeah. But I guess right. And it looks like enrollment did go down in like the raw numbers,
Mhm.
not the projected numbers of elementary school, but I would have liked to see it laid out like this, because this is just easier to see, easier to understand, with the 2021 levels and how, the actual 2021, actual 2022, and then also the projection.
Okay, and if there's, certainly can provide any supplemental or follow-up data to the board. It wouldn't be different data, it would just be
Right.
framed differently.
Yeah, right, just so that you can see, again, the projections look like they were just too high in elementary school, but that doesn't mean that's not really the delta that we're looking at, right? Between 2021 and 2022, it looks like it went down, but it didn't go down as much as the projected one. I don't know if I'm making sense.
You
I'm
are.
not a numbers person.
The projections would indicate a more significant drop than.
Right,
than
exactly, than we actually
realize.
have, right. So that's all. That was my
We can
comment.
work on providing an update or a supplement to this presentation for the board for review to try to capture that in the way you're thinking about it.
Yeah, thank you.
It wouldn't take much work.
So I have a question and then I guess a comment as well. Projections in all the cases shown here, or most cases shown here, seem to be higher than the actual. Is that common or?
It's a general statement, it's a fair generality, yes.
But is that historically, I guess speaking, is that common? That projections are higher than actual?
Mr. Montgomery and Associates provided their projections in June of, I believe the board presentation was June of 2021. As far as I understand, I don't believe Mr. Montgomery's worked with us prior to that. So his data set is our current data set.
Okay.
Mr. Montgomery talked about in our phone conference earlier this week, he talked about, obviously variance and margins of error, scatter plots and different statistical pieces. But basically he was saying, when in doubt, and I think he said 30-something year experience in Delaware County specifically, as a rule of thumb, he's always added on 2 to 3% on a projection number with Delaware County. And in his words, the students always show up.
Okay.
In other words, I'll try to translate that. It's not always as clean to look at a Delaware County school district other than Haverford, because we are one township. Other districts have multiple municipalities, et cetera. And that impacts his work, but he used the word anomaly. He's curious, academically, intellectually curious about the anomaly himself, and that's what he shared with me.
There also is, I'm just looking at the last slide, the last one on the presentation here. The 22-23 projected enrollment was almost 7,000, 6,957. The actual was about 5% less than that.
Yes.
And that's actually decreased from the previous year. So, I remember when we first looked at some projections, a while ago, they were going up, and kept on going up. I'm wondering if we maybe are reaching a stage where that is worth leveling off a little bit. We are doing right now our facility study, and I think it'd be very helpful to get some updated projections on this to see. And I'm just looking at this slide as well here. It looks like for the projected levels, even under the district projected for kindergarten 1 and 2, those numbers seem to be dropping over the next, 3-4 years. So, I think just from a standpoint of planning out our facilities, our future facilities, we should get some updated data on this to make sure that we're not going to, we're not going to plan for a population that's not going to be there. It's just it's a pretty heavy variance. So and you would think that after COVID, numbers would go back up a bit, and they seem to have dipped. So that's good news in the sense that we don't have quite the scary situation that we were envisioning, I guess a few months ago. But I think updated numbers would be very helpful to help aid with that study.
We will be bringing forward a recommendation once we can get a little more information from Montgomery and Associates. I don't think we need a full-blown demographic study. There has to be some way that they can continue to work with us and provide more of an update than they did when they provided the addendum that first year. So once we get that information, the cost associated with it, we'll be making a recommendation that we engage them, in more than just the informal conversations that we've been appreciative of their
Very much so.
willingness to have, but more of an in-depth analysis on that.
So will that analysis include them kind of looking at at these numbers projected versus the actual for 2022, 23, and maybe offering explanation of of what's happening, of why it's going back down again? I mean, it's kind of
As best as they can. I mean, if
yeah,
you
I mean,
recall, they did.
no one's perfect
They were
with
able
stuff, I get
to
that.
project, and partially because of some of the legwork that David engaged in reaching out to the parochial schools in the area. And if you recall, one in particular reported that it was their largest kindergarten enrollment they had ever had last year. So we recaptured some of those children as first grade students this year, but not as many as we have in the past. So his analysis last year gave us an indication that the students are in the township for that particular cohort year, but perhaps we're in the parochial school system. I don't know what David is mentioning now about real estate. What are some of the other factors? Like,
That's
are the
interesting,
children
yeah.
in the township now? And I'm glad to hear that he has already reached out to realtors in the area, but yeah, he could get some of that information for us.
Okay, yeah, no, I appreciate that. I just wanted to kind of figure out
Yep.
what the reasoning for that is, so that we know what we're dealing with moving forward.
Our partners in the community with the parochial system and our preschools have been very generous with their time and the information they're willing to share with us, and we're always grateful to gather that. We do it in the month of October historically, at least while I've been presenting these, to try to give as comprehensive a picture to the board as possible.
Okay, great, thank you.
To, I guess, continue with Mr. Schwartz's questioning, I was thinking, Dr. Rushi, when it does come time for kind of understanding the trends, I know typically we'll see families that may choose to send their students to parochial schools for K and then return in first grade, and if we're finding that they're going to be staying K first, second, as you mentioned, they're in the district. So does that mean that everyone is coming back in the later grades as they're progressing, and what does that mean for our facilities as we're planning? And so kind of having that further understanding as to the why, and maybe even the when, if we see a trend, would be helpful as well.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to point out on this slide, the 21-22 adds up to 6,791, which is a much bigger number than the previous slide for the 21 enrollment of 6,653. The previous slide makes it look like the 21 and 22 enrollment are much closer together. So just wanted to check on that, because then it also leads to maybe different interpretations of what's happening on the last slide. Like, if you look from like K in one year to one in the year that follows it, the pattern at the top of the table is significant increases from kindergarten to first grade each subsequent year, but this year looks like a smaller one. Similarly, going from 5th to 6th grade, looks like traditionally it's been a bump. Kids come in at the 6th grade point, but it looks like this year it went down. Similarly for coming into 9th grade, like, how do you interpret some of those trends? And I just wanted to check that line adding up to the 6,791 is the right comparison to use for the 22-23 year.
You'll have to look at that, David.
We'll have to follow up with you, I'm
Good
sorry.
catch, by the way. Something I didn't even see. You're absolutely right, yeah. 6,653
Yeah.
versus
That would be a
6,791.
difference of 9 people.
What's that?
From 2021, that would only be a difference of 9 people,
Yeah.
rather than,
Right, for the
Like-
previous slide makes it look like 9,
yeah,
right?
right.
But yeah, just trying to figure out where those entry points are, like, are we losing, this kind of shows more significant losing students in more of the grades, but perhaps that's not the correct interpretation. But I agree with the comments from the board members that this is like a lot of data to dig into and like wanting to understand the why. I also appreciate that these are probably longer term trends and it's hard to get real clear understanding. Like we aren't, I don't think we have a really good way to survey those preschool parents and ask, or the ones at the parochial school and ask, like, well, when do you think you might be enrolling your kids in our district? But but, good, you know,
But
good
we do ask their
questions to
program
raise.
directors if they're aware of that information.
That would be great, yeah, anyone who wants to volunteer and share
If
that
we're willing to
information
volunteer,
would
we'll,
help,
we'll
right.
collect it, yes. My understanding from Mr. Montgomery and Mr. Lambert is historically, again, broad numbers. In this township, we have served, on average, approximately 40% of our eligible population any given year. When we asked Mr. Lambert and Mr. Montgomery to do an update for the board as an addendum to their work in the spring of '21, this time last year, they provided a relatively detailed report based on the PIMS data and also the parcel data from the county. And they suggested that number might have dropped during the pandemic in a ratio perspective, slightly, less than 10%. But they were, my words, not theirs, they were hesitant to draw any conclusions because we were 1 year coming out of the pandemic. In my this week, conversations with Mr. Montgomery, who is in Georgia, he still kind of, and I didn't even volunteer the information, ironically, he brought it right to mind. He was still stuck on that, not in a bad way, but intellectually curious. In this, working in Delaware County as much as he has during his career, he wants to understand it as much as I believe I do, and I believe the board does. So, you know, as to the direction the board provides, we will examine this to the fullest extent.
Can maybe more of a comment than a question on the demographic summary slide?
Yes.
Just something that I was looking at, the patterns in the data, particularly for low-income English learners and special education students. While, like, English learner, for instance, is still a very small percentage, if we look at the changes over the past 2 years, that's an increase of more than 100% in the numbers. Special education, again, like,
It's about a percentage, yeah.
like, it's, you know, and then like low income, that's like almost a 40%
12.
increase in the low income population.
Right.
It's still a relatively small percent of our actual student enrollment, but just in terms of the numbers, the percentage increases, those are pretty sizable. And I would say those are 3 populations of students that probably need additional supports or resources. Do we have any projections about that?
So,
Or
if you don't mind,
yeah.
I just wanted to comment on the special education numbers. We noticed that a lot of the families that were new to the district were enrolling with students with IEPs. So they're like, is this a higher number than normal? And it seemed to be this year that families moving into the district, specifically families with students who would be in our specialized programs, our autistic support programs, we saw a pretty big increase of new families moving into the district.
And we created a new section.
And we had to create a new section in addition to the already created new section of autistic support based on that number.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm just thinking in terms of planning and forecasting, you know, that to create an entire new support classroom, that's a lot of resources that are needed.
Yes.
And, you know, I would imagine the resources needed for English learners, you know, that's probably pretty significant, supports that low-income students might need as well. So just in terms of planning, like, do we have a sense that there are projections we can get for some of those demographics? Do we know anything about that? Are other districts seeing similar changes? I mean, I guess I'm just trying to get more information.
I haven't had the opportunity to compare or ask anybody to compare. I mean, that's to be plain.
Okay.
I'm responsible for EL, English Learner Programming here in Haverford Township. So I briefly, that number is, I'm not sure how to say this. It's very hard to predict because we have the first month of school for all new enrollments to do our screenings and follow the process and protocols outlined by PDE. And we had, I believe off the top of my head, I want to say, forgive me if this is not exact, but I want to say 37 new students this September, or, you know, in our schools as of today, that started with us in September, that we didn't know where they were coming from or what their history was. And it was not necessarily an even scatter plot across the grade levels. Nor was it heavy at kindergarten or first.
Okay.
So in terms of analysis, it would be a best guess, and I don't want to do that.
Okay. Yeah, just curious, just as we're thinking about our facility needs, our resources, you know, allocations, things like that, you know, anything we can do, I think, to help kind of project where some of these could be going. And if you know, if it's not predictable, then, like, so be it. And that's, you know,
maybe
the way it
similar
is,
to.
right? Unfortunately. but-
Maybe similar to what Mrs. Battistelli was just sharing in terms of the special ed population. You know, we do, in our department, we do a lot of collaboration within the county and the other LEAs with the support of DCIU, Delaware County Intermediate Unit. And in terms of EL, at least I can speak to, if it's helpful to the board, happy to survey the rest of the county to see if they're seeing similar numbers or increases at rates.
Thank you. Similar to the need for an additional autism support classroom, did the enrollment this year cause any other kind of new grade configurations or programming impacts?
We did add add sections, but nowhere near, I think, we needed to open up a section of a particular grade level over at Coopertown. I think there was one at Linwood. But everything else, we were able to be right within what had been projected, what we were anticipating. And I think we brought more of the EL services in-house.
We did. We added an additional EL teacher.
Which has been a huge benefit for our students, and our staff has been very appreciative.
Previously, that was a contracted service that we would obtain from the intermediate unit, but with the growing numbers, I thought that was one of the ones that was on your budget
It's on my
request.
list.
Thank you.
Any other question from the board?
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Jen will introduce the next one.
Okay, so thank you. We are very happy to be here tonight, Dr. Jeff Nesbitt, Ms. Sandy Connolly, and myself to share some information regarding our Preparing Contemporary Citizens goal and what the pursuit of that goal looks like this year. And so Sandy's going to kick us off, and the three of us will sort of go back and forth on the slides, and we're excited to share this work with you.
Great. All right, so I think you began.
Oh, all right, so I'll kick this up. Here we go. Sandy got us to the right slide, though. We'll notice that. So just as a reminder for anyone who may not be as familiar with this goal as we are, our goal with Preparing Contemporary Citizens is really about modernizing and expanding the learning experiences. And there were several traits and qualities of learners that we really wanted to grow for our students, and those include critical thinking, problem solving, innovative design, and doing that all with the understanding that they're entering a complex global society, more so now than ever before. And so our goal is to build a process that ensures all students get to experience those things in a variety of places, K through 12. You may recall, I like to just put this slide in every presentation, but it is relevant for this one. This is our curriculum review cycle. So essentially what it does is maps out in what years we're going to review what subjects so that we can analyze, is what we're doing working? Is what we're doing aligned to standards, aligned to what best practices are, aligned to what, exemplary districts are doing? And where are any gaps so that we can fill them and adjust? And sometimes that means adding resources. Sometimes that means using what we have differently. It usually involves developing curriculum after we've audited the curriculum and then implementing what was developed. So that's what you see with all these colors going across the slide. And that's our yearly schedule for doing that. And it's essentially a 6-year cycle so that every subject gets looked at every 6 years. But what we've done now is we've paused the cycle because we recognize that the work of creating students who are critical thinkers and expanding on the problem solving and the innovative design is not something you can ask individual teachers to do on their own and expect large scale impact. It's rather something that needs to be like baked in the sauce, if you will, right? It's got, not that you bake sauce, you can tell I'm not the cook in my family, but you really have to make it a part of the system. And the way to do that is knowing that every subject gets looked at every 6 years or so, is to make sure that when we're looking at those things, there is a way that we are ensuring it's written into the curriculum, it's written into the instructional delivery, it's written into the assessment. And so we have decided to, rather than just jump ahead and audit English language arts as we might have, stop and actually audit our audit process, sort of audit our cycle, and add in this element of critical thinking, problem solving, innovative design within a complex global society. So that's what we're doing this year. And at the end of this year, we plan to have some addition to the curriculum review cycle. We're not sure if it's going to be sort of a menu of items, if it's going to be a new way that everybody has to complete this rubric about how their assessments are going to look, if everybody's going to include a certain type of unit we don't know what that's going to be, but we know that there will be an amendment to the process that then every subject will participate in as they develop their curriculum.
Any questions about that so far? All right. Thanks, Ms. Saxa. So who are we? And it looks like, there we go. Two more. There we go. Okay, so we have representation across the district, as we always do. Many of these people have been on the Preparing Contemporary Citizens Committee for a few years, and now that we're into the 2.0, looking at modernizing assessment, we've been able to add in a few new people. And so there's almost someone from every school, from different content areas. We've got district-wide staff, people from Oakmont as well. So we've got a really nice group of invested folks. And we had our first meeting yesterday, and we were able to get started on this work. The first thing we're going to do is to have approximately 6 in-person meetings, or they may be on Zoom, because we're finding that time-wise, with everybody in different buildings, that probably makes the most sense. And also, they'll have some hours that will be asynchronous, where they'll be reading research and things like that. And they'll get paid either for the workshop rate or flex. So they'll have an opportunity of how they get remunerated for their time. And the goal, as Ms. Sachs has said, is to continue to work on our goal of expanding and modernizing the assessment opportunities for our students. And, you know, we think about, why do we want to look at assessment? And the reason is because first of all, as she said, we don't want one person to have to try to figure this out all on their own. But, you know, I'm not sure about your jobs, but you probably don't have to take a multiple choice very often, right? Multiple choice test very often. You may not even have to do like a written assessment where you sit down and in a time period of time, you have to write an essay. Now, that doesn't mean you wouldn't have to write an essay with research and things like that you're doing to present somewhere, but it is a different kind of environment when you get out into jobs and careers. And so we want to be keeping that in mind as well. What are we doing to prepare our students for what they're going to be getting in the real world? We want to think about beginning with the end in mind, and the understanding by design sort of idea of looking at curriculum, so that what is measured is taught. So we go back to, okay, this is what we want as the outcome. How are we going to teach that to prepare our students to be ready for that? So Jen can outline our, here we go,
Will you go
outline
back
our
for a
action
second,
plan.
Sarah?
One second. Go back.
Yep.
Thank you.
Oh, yes, okay. That's an important note. We aren't getting rid of all the assessments we currently have. We have lots of good assessments that teachers have invested lots of time in, curriculum writers have invested time in, so that we have ways to measure our curriculum, so that we can progress monitor how we're doing along the way, so we can prepare students to take state assessments that we need to be used to. Those aren't going away. So we'll keep those assessments too, and we'll have a balance. We just want to be able to bring in and give students an opportunity to present their knowledge of content in a different way. Okay, so our action plan, Ms. Saxa?
Great, thank you. So our group, our committee, it has had its first meeting, and at that point, we went over the goals, the work that we are embarking on, why we are embarking on that work, and then the process that we think we're going to engage in. Whenever you work with a group of teachers and administrators, you have to be open to, like, your plan may not be the best plan, right? And they may have good ideas about how to add steps to the process or additional things to think about. So we outlined a plan, and then we'll move through it and see that it works the way we need it to. The process itself is really based on what we do anytime we look at curriculum. We're going to be conducting an internal audit of our current practices and how well we believe they are working. So we're gonna have to find out what kinds of assessment are we giving, you know, how are kids doing with those assessments? We're gonna have to, you know, find ways to gather information about that, talk to teachers, talk to students. So that's sort of about us. And then we look outward and we say, all right, well, what does the research say about assessment? What does the research say about what skills students need and how to ascertain whether or not they've obtained those skills? What are some other exemplary districts who are having really good results out there doing? How far do we want to expand that search? Is that a nationwide search? Is that looking internationally? Those were some of the questions our group is already asking. We'll, of course, try and learn as much as we can from all kinds of stakeholders, community members. You know, it'd be very interesting to talk to, I think this was Jeff's thought, talk to local businesses. What are the skills they're looking for? How will we assess, how do they assess whether or not people have those skills? How will we assess if we are helping students build to those skills? Working with the technical schools, finding out from parents, guardians about what they see, finding out from students, what's that experience like? What sticks with them? Recent graduates. It's pretty ambitious, but that's where we're starting, is how to think about how will we talk to people and better understand what's currently happening and what their experience is. Like I said before, once we have the information about what we're currently doing and sort of what the recommended ideas are, we'll do a little gap analysis. What are we doing too much of? What are we not hitting at all? And where do we want to go from there? And that's where we'll develop the plan. And the plan will be, how will we adjust that cycle? What will we ask of all subjects to do as they're looking at creating their assessments through the curriculum process? Of course, communication is always an important piece. So we will be coming back here and sharing with you our progress along the way. We won't have any hard and fast anything until the end of the school year, but we'll let you know, so far this is what we found, and now we're moving on to this next step. We also, I'll let Sandy talk about the next piece. Yeah.
I think
Or maybe it's Jeff.
This is Jeff.
Great.
Yeah.
So potential ideas for exploration, we really focused on 21st century skills: create, collaborate, critically think, and communicate. And if you think about a traditional assessment, pen and paper multiple choice assessment, we may not be asking for many of those 4 skills. We're hoping that they're critically thinking during those assessments, but the ability to create something new, the ability to collaborate with others and communicate your findings with others isn't necessarily part of that traditional assessment process. And so 3 big ideas that are just possibilities that we can explore further, and through our research we may find other ideas as well. But project-based learning, where students are really actively engaged in real-world and personally meaningful projects. Authentic performance tasks, where students are selecting and performance-based activities. This is actually part of next generation science standards. There's supposed to be interactive tests. We don't know if the state's going to be prepared for that, but that'll be part of our science work as well. And design thinking projects and students solving problems and improving projects. And we're actually doing some of that in some of our science classes already. And one of the things that I always say is we had a training from the Franklin Science Center, and the difference between a design thinking project and a craft is very important. That just building a shoebox and decorating it and calling it a new way to do trunk or treat isn't necessarily a design thinking process, where you have to come up with a product, test that product, redesign that product to improve that product. That's really the design thinking process that we want students to engage in. We don't want to just create crafts and call it thinking.
And Ms. Saxa mentioned the communication cycle. So we will be communicating out with you periodically to let you know about our progress and what the committee is finding. We have meetings with all of our instructional leaders each month, and so we'll keep them up to date on what's going on with the committee. And then we'll have our representatives share out with their faculty so that they know what's going on. We keep everybody in the loop. We want everybody to be as informed as possible about this. And that's it.
Actually, there's one more thing I just failed to recognize at the outset, that Sandy Connolly has been bringing leadership to this goal since its inception with various teacher co-chairs. And so this is sort of the next version of it, but I just wanted to recognize Sandy's organization of this work thus far and the way she is leading us through this new phase of it. So thank you to Sandy and of course to Jeff, because now as the curriculum coordinators and supervisors, we are the people who shepherd the curriculum writing teams through the process And so I just wanted to recognize you for that. Thank you, Sandy.
And
Now,
I
are
could
there
just
any
say thanks to all the people who have
Of course.
co-chaired with me along the way, all the teachers who have been willing to spend their time on that, and all those on the committee who spend lots of time. Now, questions? Yes.
I guess I have a couple of questions / comments. And I guess the first thing is, in terms of the goal that we're looking at, I think it'd be helpful for the public's benefit just to take a minute and talk about how we arrived at that goal.
Sure. So I left out my other three favorite slides, which are, I usually show them too. But we engaged in 2019, in December, was it November or December of 2019? We engaged in, actually it was the fall and into the winter, a strategic planning process led by an outside consultant who was seeking input from all kinds of stakeholders. She held focus groups, sort of town meetings where people could come and speak and hear more about what they wanted. There were a couple of questions she asked everybody. What would they like out of their school system? What are they looking for their students and for the children in the community? So there were sort of these town hall kinds of meetings. There were focus groups. There were surveys. We surveyed we surveyed she surveyed, not us. She surveyed student groups, parents and guardians, all staff members, all community members. It was available on the website, so we had many different iterations of surveys. I believe it was around 4,000 survey responses that we got. She conducted focus groups with various small groups of including students and recent graduates, and then brought all of that input to a group of folks who were selected and invited to be a part of the strategic planning committee. And so that group met in this room with much older tables and less comfortable chairs. And that group consisted of folks who were not only employees of the district, but also community members, parents, guardians, students. We tried to really vary the voices that were here because we looked for people who had been employed here a long time, people who were new to us. People who were involved in parent-teacher organizations and people who were not. Parents and guardians of EL students, students with IEPs, students with low socioeconomic status. So we tried to sort of run the gamut, teachers from elementary, middle, high school, subject areas, pupil services, just really trying to get representation from as many groups of people as possible. And that group took all of the input and also did a little research on what's coming in the future. What kinds of jobs are projected to be in our area as well as across the country? What kinds of skills are expert groups predicting are needed? By the way, those were what used to be called soft skills. Lots of communication, lots of being able to work with others, lots of being able to be flexible, adaptable, and learn to learn. So we looked at all of that and then took all of the input. We actually had folks sitting in a room, like going through paper surveys and trying to find trends and reading the actual results. And so that group came up with trends, or essentially buckets of areas. And one of the areas was social emotional wellness, ensuring that students really were prepared and supported socially and emotionally as well as academically. Another bucket was diversity and inclusion. And the first bucket, the primary bucket, was this idea of preparing citizens, not for the world we're in now, but like for the world that they're going to encounter. I think that the year we talked about was 2032. Was it 20? Because it was like whoever our current kindergartners were, what was the world going to be like then? And so that is sort of where we came up with the buckets, and those teams revised statements, and then went back and took a look at our mission and our pillars and made sure that everything aligned. And they were pretty well aligned anyway, but just sort of changed some wording so it was a little less awkward and made sure that we were including all of these things. So that was my long answer to your short question.
Thank you, though. I think that, it's important for folks to know that this it wasn't just a couple administrators sitting around deciding what we're going to do. And the other thing I want to say, and this is sort of just the latest version of an ongoing effort to always be trying to do a better job educating our students. So, I think that in the current environment. There's times where folks get distracted by various issues, and they might say, we need to focus more on academics. Well, folks, we're focusing on academics all the time. That's the business of the school district. And we're focused on trying to do that better for every student all the time. And I can say that whatever the current framework for that is, that we've been doing that since I've been here, and that's a while. So thank you for your presentation.
Just a question I have is, one of the potential outcomes of this is that by having different ways of assessing, that our students will have different ways of demonstrating their knowledge and expertise. So it's not as much of a one-size-fits-all, right? But that we will be able to recognize more clearly the knowledge, the skills, the content that the kids have mastered, because they'll have more ways of showing that. Is like, do we expect those kinds of benefits, and how will we see those?
Excuse me. So I think that that's a very much a possible outcome. We're looking at being able to give possibly choice after an assignment, so that there might be more than one way that students could demonstrate their knowledge and their proficiency. And so that would allow for some more differentiation for our students, so that they would have some say. We're trying to bring in student voice in so much of what we do. And so when we identify what those different types of assessment are, then we'll know a little bit more about how they'll be able to demonstrate it.
I think, yeah, that sounds like an interesting and intriguing possibility, right? For maybe there's students who struggle on a timed multiple choice test, like was one of the examples, but would really thrive with the chance to do a more like dramatic project or hands-on kind of project. I also wondered how the thinking with, doesn't the state allow for different pathways to graduation? I don't know how, I guess I could maybe know like how many of those our district has availed ourselves of, but is there some thinking that it may change the ways in which we, monitor the students' completion of the requirements for graduation as well?
I think there are, first, we are availing of ourselves of all of the pathways, right? Like you said, students have different needs, and so we certainly are using them. They are pretty well laid out by the state what those pathways are, but they do include things like getting an industry recognized credential, which is not something that we necessarily would have been like setting kids up with that opportunity before, right? They include service learning projects on there. They include internships, pre-apprenticeships. I mean, so it really does expand things, and it lends a little legitimacy to a school district then being able to say, yeah, this is how we measure it too. So we do appreciate that there is some diverse method now of attaining that. And I also want to recognize our teachers currently vary their assessments. So we don't want to we have lots of great projects, lots of great rubrics. Dr. Nesbitt just talked, very easily about two things in particular, but we do try and work on projects, and we do all of those things and try and work with kids and have some choice. What we're talking about is really honing in on what are those future skills that they're needed. One of which is self-navigation, right? Everybody's have to figure out how to get themselves going in the right direction. And you don't just learn that. Somebody has to teach you how to do that. So we are going to do that, and then have it as a way of doing business for everybody, so that teachers are supported in doing it, and they're not the ones having to sit there every time and from scratch make up a project, because we have those kinds of projects built into the curriculum. If it's projects, right?
A comment and a question. So my comment, these potential ideas for exploration, they sound so fascinating and engaging. And I think that these are the kinds of things that, if I were a student here, would get me really excited about learning, right? As opposed to a multiple choice test, which, I was not a good multiple choice test taker, so I would much rather do many of these other things. Graphing data, love that. As opposed to a multiple choice test. So my question for you, some of these things, going back to the earlier thing, like surveying you know, local businesses and things like that. What are the skills you need? Is there a way that we could sort of use these kinds of ideas? I'm thinking like plant a garden or develop a plan to use empty lots in your neighborhood. Like those seem like things where we could have partnerships within the community where students could actually, like, you know, the best project, cool, here's your lot, let's make it happen. You know, it's like, are we thinking about that as well? Like a way for us as a district to sort of engage the community?
So we've talked a lot about that in the science community already, and we have actually done some community projects. I mean, Discover Day is certainly a very community-based effort that's very multi-level with the elementary age students and high school students. We also did a governor's STEM last year where the girls are creating an artificial intelligence computer program that is reading sign language. They did a presentation at the board, and they went to the School for the Blind and learned from the School for the Blind for how to do that. It is difficult to systematize those community-based projects because, like we built a bicycle that charges iPads at Linwood 2 or 3 years ago, but we couldn't keep building bicycles for every elementary school, and they're kind of really cool projects, and then you kind of back off. And gardens are very troublesome because gardens are amazing, and then there's a summertime, and it's really hard to maintain gardens. So we've had little garden projects that have struggled a little bit. But we're always talking about that, and I think we'll broaden that discussion and talk about how do we get community tied to these projects. Is there a way to systematize it? We've got a class or two at the high school that's in the science community that we've been constantly talking about. Is there something? The challenge is finding something that's sustainable, can be done yearly with the same community, but moved to a different part in the community in some way. So that's one of the obstacles that we found, but we're always looking at it.
That's great, thank you.
It actually, it goes to my question, which is about also my favorite slide, the chart of the audits. I've loved the slides for many years. It's great. But I like that we are sort of taking a breath to really analyze this and focus on developing the curriculum. But what my favorite thing about this chart is that sort of like the step of analysis or monitoring is always going to come a couple years later, right? And so it's like you're doing it now, well, you know you're going to do it again in 6 years. And so where does it fit in? You know, we're going to do this analysis now, maybe implement some changes. Where is this being audited? Right? Like anything that we're implementing here this year, what analysis are we doing 4 years from now as to like, oh, we decided to do, you know, one of these really great different types of assessments, you know, how is it working, right? Is that part of this, where does it fit in?
It's actually, that's a great question. We like to use the phrase that curriculum is a living, breathing document. So we sometimes in real time scrap a plan because it turns out we tried it and it's not going to work, or we're not going to use that one again. So we will be constantly, the teachers will continuously be evaluating what is really working, what needs to be adjusted, and what's changed. And that often happens in like those implementation years. And then it's true, we don't have it in here, but I do sort of wonder when we get to the end of the next 6 years, will we want to audit the cycle again? And will it be for the purpose of assessment, or will it be for a different purpose in that, you know, now we did so well with assessment, now we're going to look at a particular instructional practice that we're wondering about. So I wouldn't close off the possibility of doing a sort of wholesale analysis at some point, but I do want you to know it is a part of what our teachers do anyway. So just because it's written there doesn't mean it's in stone.
Okay, thanks. Sure.
If I could just make a comment. So one of the things that I love about this presentation, the focus about the create, collaborate, critically think, and communicate. I've left this slide up the entire time because I really love it, because when I look at that, it makes me think how we are preparing students beyond the classroom, how it can be useful in any field. And even before the classroom, how it's useful for extracurricular activities, how it's useful for problem solving on respective sports fields, how it's useful for just making decisions when mom and dad or caregiver are not there, and what am I supposed to do now? And so I love that aspect that it's allowing our students to have this live learning experience. I learned about this and now I can use it outside of class. I don't have to wait until my Friday quiz comes, right? I can experience this now, and I think it has the potential to provide a ongoing reward for students when they work through something, when they're able to organize and figure something out, and then that becomes their own motivation to keep thinking this way, to keep doing these things. So that excites me to see that there.
Great. Thank you.
Us too.
Yeah.
Don't get started.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and to the whole team working on this.
Did you put the grade on, the audit cycle grade, because it's.
Do you want me to do the announcements? Okay, thank you very much. And next, we have a couple of information items that we just want to inform. It's not presentations, but just want to inform the board and those who are watching and the public. The first is the Chester County IU Support of Special Education Curriculum Review. Nicole, would you mind sharing a little bit?
Yes, I actually asked Sandy to put the slide back
great.
up that we
Oh, good. There we
love
go.
so very much, because this contract that will be on the agenda, on the November 3rd agenda, seeking board approval, is for a contract with the CCIU for support in the audit part of the review cycle for both gifted programming and curriculum and life skills programming and curriculum. So our audits are slightly different because we're not looking just at curriculum. We're looking at the procedures in place, the professional development attached to the program, the instructional delivery model, because in our specialized programs, there's different models that can be used. And so we're seeking the board's approval to work with the CCIU so that they can add some of their expertise to that audit in both gifted and life skill support. We did seek we met with two different IUs, and we feel that the CCIU's proposal was both more thorough and more cost-effective for the district. So that will be on the next agenda, and we would appreciate your support.
So looking at this chart,
Mhm.
I don't see life skills and gifted on there,
I
so.
have my own version.
Put that
Okay.
one up. Yeah, we have
Yeah.
a version of.
I overlaid with this chart our programming, and so our gifted and life skills would be in the audit cycle this year, and ELA was in audit last year and is in developed this year.
So there are just audits and
We're just-
reviews and development going on all the time and all around.
Like I said, we're pretty good, but we always like to be better, so we will keep doing that.
Okay.
I'll take the next one.
Sure.
Okay. The next information item on there, you will recall perhaps, at last week's board meeting, I did make what I was calling a public service announcement. We continue to look for a teacher of Latin. We have exhausted a lot of possibilities. We're open to other possibilities, but we have not gotten, much of a response. When Jen's department looked into the number of certificates that the state of Pennsylvania awarded for people seeking certification as teachers of Latin, it was 6?
9?
Or 9, okay, across the whole state of Pennsylvania. We have looked into online options. We have looked at other districts, possibly doing our own kind of distance learning. Many districts have dropped Latin, and the announcement is just at this point in time, I anticipate there is a distinct possibility that when the high school program of studies course of study guide is brought before the board, you will not see Latin 1 in there. We are coming up now, our effort is going into how will we do right by the students who are currently enrolled in Latin and provide opportunities with the one teacher that we have. We have one teacher. All right, so provide some opportunities utilizing the skills of that one teacher to see those children through so that they can complete. It's not responsible for us to continue to allow children to select Latin as their language when they're moving into the high school next year. So unless something changes between now and the time that the course of study guide comes before you, that's a real possibility that it will just be the other years, but no Latin 1 listed in there.
And Dr. Rushi, if that were the case, would we be replacing Latin with a different language offering?
I'll turn that to Ms.
Yeah,
Saxon.
that's actually something that we are going to have a discussion with the world language teachers about. We are also cognizant that it's not only Latin certifications that have declined. First of all, it's all teaching certifications, but particularly the world languages. And it's something we want to take into account because we don't want to start with another language and then turn and find ourselves in the same situation with another language. But we will still certainly have world language opportunities for every child. As we know, it is an imperative part of their high school education and often required for what they're doing in the future as well.
Is Latin one, is that a subject that they are introduced to in the middle school, then they do the quarter classes? So it would have an impact on that as well.
Exactly.
Any other comments or questions? The next area of our agenda is the time for public comment. Is there anyone who would like to make a comment tonight?
Sorry, I just wanted to comment briefly. Thank you for the presentations. I really.
And could you just say your name and?
Oh, sorry. Sarah Johnson, I'm a resident of the Township. Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I thought it was really interesting. I recently worked on a design thinking course for UI UX, so it's definitely a skill that is needed in the 21st century. I just had kind of a comment and I guess a theory about the first presentation and the data of maybe why some of the student enrollment is dropping, and just a suggestion for the board. I used to live in another city where there were a lot of charter schools and a lot of Catholic schools, parochial schools. And it's interesting, we were zoned for highly rated public school, like Haverford. And when I went to enroll, I started talking to other families and why they were choosing charter schools or parochial schools. The one thing that I kept hearing over and over that really surprised me was it wasn't academics. That's not why people were not enrolling their children in the public schools. Parents really wanted to be involved at the elementary school level, and the charter schools open the doors wide open to the parents. I mean, it's a night and day difference. And I think parents really want to be involved, especially at the elementary school level. And I think over the last 20 years, the door has really closed. And I think the charter schools and the parochial schools really look at the parents and guardians as customers because they have to kind of draw them in. And really that's what people just want to be involved. They want to go to morning meetings. They want to go to field day. They want to go to the holiday parties. And I think that's not just here at Haverford, but just in public school education. I think that's really been lost. I'm sure if you think back, Mr. Feinberg, when you first joined the board, there were probably more opportunities for parents. And I think because of the school shootings and obviously the pandemic, it's just the doors kind of shut even more. And I think that's really the key that the charter schools have figured out, is that they've figured out a way to let the parents back in. And it is really difficult, obviously, for security reasons. But, a lot of times the charter schools are working on smaller budgets, but, they'll hire security guards. We used to have to scan your driver's license when you came in, but it was just amazing. I mean, you could go to morning meeting every morning. You could go on any field trip you wanted. Grandparents could come. And it was really wonderful. So I think as a board, if you could find more opportunities, maybe not as much at the middle school and high school level, but really at that elementary school level, kindergarten, first grade. I mean, parents just want to be involved. And I think it's also a way for parents to get to know the teachers. And I think it's just changed so much. And I know personally, I definitely see the difference. So that's just a suggestion. And it's just a hypothesis. I could be wrong, but thank you for your time.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm interested in thinking about that. I know my kids are now older, but when they were in elementary school, I felt like I had a lot of access to volunteering in different ways with after-school clubs and being a reader, or secret reader, that kind of thing. But interesting to consider.
No, it's very interesting. I think about American Education Week, sitting in my son's classes at Linwood for my older two, but not for my younger. My parents were able to attend Grandparents' Day, and that's not their Young Writers' Day. It was a wonderful tradition at Linwood, and that was time I would volunteer the whole day. It's a very interesting hypothesis.
Yeah. We do have Young Writers Day scheduled for this year as well.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, yeah, we do. And we're still looking for lunch monitors.
That's a good way to get in and meet the kids and staff, right?
Some of our buildings are in desperate need of it.
And if they teach Latin, that's even.
Perfect, that's like the perfect candidate.
Any other speakers? Then that concludes tonight's agenda. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.